We go on to the 1700s, from the 1600s to the 1700s, and we see that many of the Christian men and leaders are pastors. Many of the pastors read from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, where it says there's a time for love and a time for hate, a time for peace and a time for war. And throughout that time, we find many of these ministers actually doing a lot of saber rattling within their pulpits, telling the people that what Great Britain was doing against the colonies was not right. The soldiers from Great Britain treated the colonists very poorly. They would pillage, they would rape, they would steal, they would murder. They would have their own kangaroo courts to vindicate them from their crimes. And so it just continued, so that by the middle 1700s, the colonists were getting pretty fed up with how they were being treated. In comes George Washington in 1750, 1751, 1752, 53. First, he's a captain for the British military. He moves on to be a colonel with the British military. Fights at Fort Duquesne, which later became Fort Pitt, which later became Pittsburgh today. And a prophecy is made concerning him, quit shooting at him. He's going to be a great man someday by the Indians that were shooting at him. 1775 to 1783, we see Valley Forge, the Revolutionary War, the Declaration of Independence. And I want to read you something from the Declaration of Independence. The original document, as we've talked about in the past, and the original signers hated slavery. Now, this is an important concept because there's really two types of slavery out there. There's a slavery that we can all talk about. There's a slavery of taking people from their homeland, putting them on a boat by force, and bringing them into a new land. Understand, slavery has been in the world since Cain slew his brother. And when slavery entered into mankind, it was thought to be pretty normal. Even Jesus talked about slavery in that day. The Apostle Paul talked about slavery in his day. You can read the Bible and find that there was a lot of slavery going on right up to this time. But God wanted to remove slavery. And we see back in the 1600s that what the Christians believed. Remember, we're under a brand new covenant that, quite frankly, the Jews were never under up until the days of Jesus. So we're under a brand new covenant. We're told to look at things brand new, to treat others as we would treat ourselves. And if we want others to treat us a certain way, we should treat them a certain way. And if we want to be treated as slaves, maybe then we should treat others as slaves. So slavery was an issue. And the preachers and the godly men and the people that started the universities back in the 1600s and the 1700s, all of them were ministers that started colleges for ministers, Harvard University, Yale, Brown University, the University of Pittsburgh, and so on. All these colleges, all these universities were Christian colleges meant to educate preachers for the gospel. That's how they started out. Unlike the Ivy League kind of a mentality they have today. And all the way up until the mid-1700s, there was a battle going on with the kings of Great Britain, saying that we don't want slavery in our colonies. Now, there were some slaveholders. Even George Washington had slaves. But not everyone in the South had slaves. And all the northern colonies, when they signed their compacts, they signed it saying, we will not allow slavery in our colony or eventually in our state. So come now, 1776, and the Declaration of Independence is drafted. I'm going to read you an initial draft. One of the things they go through, and by the way, the thing of taxation without representation was item number 19 in the original draft. It wasn't even the first thing, so a lot of people say, well, we broke away because of taxes. No, we didn't. We broke away because of religious differences. And it's all through it. But I'm going to read you something here that didn't make the final draft, but it was in the original draft. Talking about the King of Great Britain. He has waged civil war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty and the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivated and carrying them into slavery into another hemisphere to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. This piratical warfare of opprobrium and infidel powers is the warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain this type of commerce. That this assemblage of horrors might be in want of no fact and of distinguished dye, he is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them by murdering the people upon whom he obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against those liberties, and so on and so forth. Now, that didn't make the final draft of the Declaration of Independence, but it was in the initial one and was there for some time until some of the Southern leaders wanted that removed in order to keep slavery there. Now, that's important. As we found out last week, so we come up to 1808, and we find out that the USA prohibits the importing of slaves from Africa, but does not prohibit the use of slaves on property. Again, understand it was everyone south of the Mason-Dixon line that had slaves. And again, it wasn't everyone in the South that had slaves, just rich property owners had slaves. So we need to put this in a proper perspective. Then we find out, we bring ourselves all the way up to 1861 to 1865, the Civil War. And as we read last week from the 1863 writings of Abraham Lincoln and also the second inaugural address by Abraham Lincoln in 1865, we find out that Abraham Lincoln talks only about the slavery issue, and that is what's caused the Civil War. The history books have been rewritten to say, the Civil War was over commerce, over this or that. It was over the slavery issue. Make no mistake about it. It was known back then, and it is known today, if you would just simply read the writings of the leaders of that day, including our president of that day, that the Civil War was over the breaking of that. Of course, we know what happened. The North won, the South lost. Slavery became illegal immediately. There was Emancipation Proclamation given by our president at that time. Slaves became free, even though many of them never moved off the plantation. They became free men, as they were called back then. Now, the second type of slavery that we can talk about today is a slavery that most people don't know about. And it's a slavery of the mind, and it is slow boiling of, you could say, ourselves in hot water with the heat turned up ever so slowly so that we do not recognize that we are changing our opinions about what's right and what's wrong. Last night I had the TV on, I wasn't even watching it, I was studying, and all of a sudden out came one curse word, then another curse word, then another curse word, and another curse, all taking the Lord's name in vain in about a 2-minute period of time. Before I could hop up and change the channel, there it was. Just happened very quickly. And it was all taking the Lord's name in vain, where 20 years ago that wasn't allowed on television. Humorists couldn't take the Lord's name in vain. Yet we think that's normal and natural, and we actually allowed into our living rooms. I remember when I was a child, one of my uncles came over, and when he finally left, my mother said to my father, and it was her relation, not my father's relation. She said, "My goodness, I hate him coming over. Did you hear how many times he took the Lord's name in vain?" When my parents had those people over, they got him, whether relatives or not, they got him out of the house as quickly as they could. Yet today we invite this stuff in through our television sets and our radios and our music. And we think that's normal. We've been boiled, you could say, very slowly over a long period of time, made to change our opinion over things that have changed. And there is a slavery that comes with that. A slavery of the mind, a changing of a mindset. Well, we found out in 1905, we talked about the Azusa Street revival and what happened there and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit that happened there. And it happened predominantly by a black man, William J. Seymour, who got the baptism of the Holy Spirit, I believe, but he never believed he received it. And we talked about Frank Bartleman, who chronicled what was going on in Azusa Street. And we found out that had William J. Seymour, had he been still a slave, these things would not have occurred, and his parents were slaves themselves, and he was born into a slave home. And yet now, in a free nation, these things begin to break out, and we see some great things happening to this nation. Recognize what happened back there to Spain over a 200-year period of time, that God operates not so quickly And the devil operates seemingly not so quickly, but over long periods of time.